Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever it may be where you are. How is everyone today? I'd love to see some comments coming in whenever you're ready. Today we plan to focus on the GMAT Focus. Will it be to your advantage or will it be to your disadvantage? Should I wait to take that version of the test, or should I take what we're going to call the legacy GMAT, the pre-GMAT Focus version of the GMAT that we're all familiar with, whether that would be to our advantage instead? And I would love to just see some information in the chat. Where are you joining from? Where are you from? Hello? Hello, Diraj. From India. Excellent. A Texan standing in. Very nice. Welcome, Shelby. A month. Welcome to you as well. In addition to where you're from, let me know if you have any initial concerns before we begin our discussion. And also, a blanket request, if you find this presentation helpful, hitting that like button always does wonders for us. So any likes and subscribes you can throw away, that's fantastic. It helps other people find this video, and it will help people find abilities to make that decision for themselves as well. So, beginning first. My name is Chris Gentry. I already mentioned that. I scored a 770 on the GMAT. I've done that a few times now. I've been teaching GMAT courses for approximately 10 years, and I'm quite intrigued by the changes that are going to happen later this year. Yes, somewhat this kind of will be a syllabus on the GMAT Focus. But let's begin with a sample question, just to get our brains moving. Everyone take 2 minutes, try this problem. And if I may offer a suggestion, try it without traditional mathematics. Take 2 minutes, everybody. If you have an answer, put it in the chat. Let's see. Rupesh, there will not be any change for the pattern by the 21st of June. We'll see in a few moments that GMAT Focus will not be live until significantly later this year. I have B, I have C. Interesting. Delightful. 6 employees. And we have annual salaries of 14,000, 14,000, 16,000, and 17, 17, 17. As it stands, which of these 6 numbers is the awkward number? Which of these 6 numbers does not fit in with any of the others? Yeah, the 16. What if that 16 were instead 14? What is the advantage of changing the 16 to a 14, even though that is not the original question? The advantage of changing the 16 to a 14, it creates a perfect balance in this set. If that 16 were 14, you would know that in this scenario, it would be perfectly balanced at 15,500, which is fantastic because we know that it is not that. Thank you, Shelby. Exactly. We know that the 16 is larger than the 14, so we also know that A cannot work for us either. Now, if we're considering this more logic-based approach, less traditional math, and thinking of perhaps suggesting benchmark numbers, of the remaining three answer choices, what would be the next most interesting benchmark to attempt? What if 16,000 was the actual average? Would that work here? Could we make that? Could this be my average? And if we consider that, we look at my 17s. Those would be one up from that average for collectively positive 3. Each of these 14s are 2 down from that, collectively minus 4. That won't work. Those don't balance. And so I know 16,000 cannot be my average. And I know that the deficit from those 14s would actually pull this too low. Vivek, any guidance for the GMAT? I would say we start right here. The first guidance for the GMAT that we would want to address is how to solve problems without traditional algebra. Just a small little taste of what we would like to do on this GMAT test. And this will be true for both GMAT and GMAT Focus. I hope you found this a little bit interesting. Looks like everybody was getting to see fairly readily, and I hope that most of you found comfort with that. Today, we're going to discuss what is on the GMAT Focus, how it's scored, and perhaps most importantly for everyone in the room, how do I decide which version I want to take? And then we'll close with just some basic ideas of how to get the most out of your preparation. Quick question though. My colleague Whitney gave a presentation about a week ago. Is anyone here, did you also attend Whitney's presentation? Could you please let me know just yes or no? Have you also attended Whitney's presentation from about a week ago? Not seeing any yeses. GMAT Focus of 3 sections. Not the standard 2 sections that we are used to. They're dropping the essay entirely, and they're folding the integrated reasoning section into what's called data insights. That will be the interesting aspect here that we are unused to. Data insights will be data sufficiency mixed with all of the integrated reasoning question types. Verbal will have critical reasoning, reading comprehension. There will be no sentence correction anymore in verbal. And the quantitative will be entirely problem solving. So what they're doing is they are removing sentence correction entirely. They are making the quantitative section only problem solving, and they're shifting data sufficiency and combining that with integrated reasoning. Now, first, I would ask, does anyone find any of that exciting or alarming? Let's start with the removal of sentence correction. Is anyone excited about the removal of sentence correction or concerned about the removal of sentence correction? Concerned. Interesting. And the question, how do we feel about the removal of sentence correction? And if you are concerned, could you elaborate on that concern? If you're happy, could you elaborate on what makes you happy? In the meantime. Nipun, exactly. Sentence correction was the fastest question type on the entire test. And that is gone. As we look at the timing, your quant section, 45 minutes, 21 questions. Excuse me. That will be just a little over 2 minutes per question. Verbal, 45 minutes, 23 questions. A little less than 2 minutes per question. And the data insights, 45 minutes, 20 questions. That will be just the tiniest bit over 2 minutes, about 2 minutes, 15 seconds. A lot of time and energy on sentence correction, it feels unfair. I would agree with the unfair portion of that comment if GMAC was forcing this change on us at a faster pace than they are. As it stands right now, though, the pace of the change will be very relaxed. And even when GMAT Focus is actually live and people begin taking the GMAT Focus, there will be at least some period of time where you could take either version of the test, Legacy GMAT or GMAT Focus. So one of the things that we need to address on the change to GMAT Focus is, yes, there will be less topics to study. No sentence correction, for example. They're going to remove a lot of geometry as well from the quantitative side. But the timing of the actual test in terms of time per question is actually going to become possibly more extreme, possibly even more challenging. And that's something that we will want to take into account as we are planning for this. The total score range for the GMAT Focus, notice that the subscores will range from 60 to 90. Apparently, these subscores will not merely be added together. There will be some type of conversion factor taking the 3 separate subscores into account. We are not sure exactly what that conversion factor will look like yet, or what will be the balance of sections converting into that total score at the moment. The GMAT Focus total scores will all end digits of 5, as opposed to legacy GMATs, which all end a digit of 0. So instead of 700, 710, 720, GMAT Focus scores will be 705, 715, 725. I kind of have I think you are right, Svinch. If reading comprehension was removed, I have a feeling that many people would be much happier. So that is interesting. Um, I do not think that the GMAT will ever remove reading comprehension. I believe that the task of needing to take a large wealth of text information and condense it down into main themes is just too much of a necessary task for graduate school in general, certainly for getting an MBA, for them to remove that task from this test. So I have a feeling reading comprehension will always stay. Newer test takers would need way less prep time for GMAT as compared to legacy test takers. I have to be honest with you, I don't know yet. It is possible that the GMAT Focus will end up taking less prep time because of the removal of certain topics. The other side to that analysis, though, is that the topics that do remain, there is less room for error in those topics. So yeah, I feel you, Nishant. I agree that y- I think that your concerns about fairness there are valid. You may feel a little bit unhappy about this, um, but I believe that I suspect that the move is to try to make the test a more reasonable adaptation to what we're actually tasked with doing in business school, while still maintaining the time pressure aspect of the decision making aspect and maintaining the emphasis on sort of you don't need to be a math science major or you do not need to be a literature major to do well on this test. A few basics here about the test. As Nishant has mentioned, the number of years will be valid here. Um, we are a lot of this is what we suspect. We suspect that it will still be 5 times in a 12-month period. We suspect that you will still need to wait 16 days. That is the case for the legacy GMAT. There has been no indication that GMAC is going to change those requirements. We suspect that these things will stay the same. We don't know what it's going to cost yet. Again, the scoring scale there. We obviously have no idea what the average scores of the top 20 schools will be. Speed over accuracy trade-off. I I suspect that it is going to edge that way a little bit. That there will be more emphasis on the speed of analysis of text that you will need on the GMAT Focus than you need on the legacy GMAT. You will be allowed a calculator on the data insights. Integrated reasoning, you're going to need a calculator. They're not changing that aspect. One thing we are intrigued by, what will be the impact on data sufficiency questions? Now that data sufficiency will be in a section where you do have calculator usage available. At the moment, data sufficiency questions are structured and engineered in such a way that you don't really need a calculator. It can all be pen to paper math or just quick mental estimation. Will that remain true? We are not sure. And we will have the opportunity to change up to 3 answers. Now that is an interesting change. Was anyone already aware of this, or is this new information? Legacy GMAT, you select an answer, you move on to the next question. You will never see that question again. You will never have the opportunity to do anything on that question at all. GMAT Focus, you answer a question, you move on to the next. At the end of the section, if you have time remaining, you will have the opportunity to go back and change up to 3 answers. Any thoughts, comments, concerns about that change? The ability to change 3 answers in each section. And while we are considering that, one more change to note. Typically, MBA programs use the highest score. There's no indication that that will change. And there won't be any more concern about, do I cancel my score or do I keep my score? Because you will choose which test to send. You will no longer be sending all of your scores to any programs. And just a few more notes here. You will still be able to take the GMAT Focus either at a test center or online. The sections and the content will be the same for both. You will still have this idea of yellow pad and physical whiteboard and online whiteboard. We have not received official confirmation that this is going to stay the same in terms of like what you use for your scratch paper, but not any indication that that's going to change right now. As of last month, GMAC has told us that there are no plans to change the yellow pads that you use inside the test center. That does not surprise me. There's no reason why they would need to change it. And then you can choose, traditional 5-score ports, we suspect. And again, we suspect that will be a 5 times per 12-month period and an 8-time lifetime limit. And you'll still have to wait 16 days between exams. Anil, you think that the ability to come back and change questions is a good move? Savinch, you think it's good and bad? It's very interesting. I have very mixed feelings about it. I think that the only use for it will be very, very, very limited circumstances. We'll talk more about that in a second. The new GMAT Focus will be shorter. There is no essay, and the 3 sections individually are shorter. I am rather unclear of the comment from Kishore, but all right. Again, you cannot change answers on the legacy. You can change up to 3 answers per section. And just a few summation slides here. Exactly, Savage. Yeah, if you're confident in your answers, you would not want to go back and change them. And if you had to guess, do you really think that if you had to guess the first time seeing the problem, that at the end of the section, that you would come back with probably even more time pressure? Because you will not have much time left if you have any time left at the end of a section. Come back and even at the end of the section, go back and be able to solve that problem correctly now. The only purpose behind changing up to 3 answers will be if you select an answer and just realize later on, oh, I made a mistake. Perhaps you realize that it's a quant question and you realize you forgot to distribute a minus sign, and you might come back and change that answer at the end of it. Perhaps you realize that you just forgot a formula, and halfway through the rest of the section, oh, I remember that formula now, and you can go back and look at that problem at that moment. But the reality is the likelihood that you would change a wrong answer to a right answer in anything other than the situation of, oh, I know exactly what mistake I made and I know exactly how to fix it, that's a very small likelihood. So I think it's more just giving comfort for if I realize I made a careless mistake, or if my mind went blank for a moment and I forgot something momentarily that I know this, I just cannot remember it now, you can come back and do that. But those would be the only instances where you'd want to come back and change any answers. So, speaking of just dates at the moment, the main thing for us, when do I want to be done with this test? If I want to be done with this test in 2023, if I want to apply first or second round applications to most schools for the fall 2024 application cycle, then I want to be taking the legacy GMAT. I will use the existing materials. I will ignore the new exam. GMAT Focus is not going to be available in any usable sense early enough before second round deadlines of the coming application cycle. If I need to be done in 2024, I will probably take the new version of the GMAT Focus. Should I start studying now? You can, and just use the current GMAT materials. You would ignore sentence correction, you would ignore geometry, you would ignore the essay. Spoiler alert, most people ignore the essay anyways, even on the current version of the test. There's a reason they are removing the essay from the test. As for some specifics, and this is still current as of this morning, May 4th, 2023. By the way, if any Star Wars fans are out there, may the 4th be with you. June 6th will be the release date for the official prep. August 29th is when registration will open. And then we do not have a date, but we know end of the year 2023 is when registration will start for GMAT Focus. So those are the notes we have right now. So quick takeaway. A lot of the decision of legacy GMAT versus GMAT Focus depends on the time you intend to finish this test and begin working on other parts of your application. If you want to be done with the test and be ready for your applications, either first round or second round of the coming application cycle, you would want to just take the current version of the GMAT, the legacy GMAT. If you plan to finish your applications in next year, in 2024, you will want to begin preparing for GMAT Focus. You can begin studying now. You will begin with the official prep available for GMAT Focus in the beginning of June. So, is this for you? If I'm applying the third round for fall 2024 or later, GMAT Focus is for me. If I'm applying first or second round for fall 2024, I will take the legacy GMAT. Just going to hold here for any questions, comments, or concerns. And again, just a gentle request. If you're finding this helpful or informative, grab that like button. The more likes you give this video, the more it will find other people, the more it will find other opportunities to help. The original Red Books from Manhattan. Ooh. The original Red Books are, I believe, 6 to 7 years old now. You can use those. There is some information on those that might be out of date. For example, depending on depending on the edition of the Red Books you have, you might, for example, see references to concision and sentence correction, which is no longer really an issue. You would probably not see any references to integrated reasoning, for example, and you would want to have that. But yeah, I would need to know more about the dates those were published. I would say that the bulk of that would still be applicable, though. All right, so how is this scored? It is still an adaptive test. So you do still have this issue of if you have two different student profiles. Person one, the test adapts to you. You begin getting questions correct. It begins adapting, gets harder questions, and you still get quite a few of those harder questions correct, but you spend so much time on the harder questions that you sort of crash at the end a little bit. And then student two, you have this more steady performance. You never reach the highs of student one, but you also don't crash at the end. This is still going to be a where you end is what you get test. The scoring will reward consistency over inconsistency. A steady, just steady but sure increase will be better than very, very high, but then crash at the end. And it will still be this interesting aspect of it's based on the difficulty of your questions, not the number right versus wrong. This is obviously a hypothetical score profile for two different students, but is a very realistic score profile for two different test takers. They both get basically the same number of questions correct. I think if you counted them, they may get exactly the same number correct. But in order to find your breaking point, in order to find the point where you are only going to answer questions correctly 60% of the time, if the test has to give you harder questions to reach that point where you only get it correct 60% of the time, you will receive the higher score. That is still going to be true for GMAT Focus. The more difficult mix of questions you see, the higher your score will be. And I want to reiterate that. This is going to be very important when we discuss the ability to change your answers. The more difficult mix of questions that you see based on your initial work and your initial answers to the questions, the higher your overall score is going to be. Now let's consider this. This is the same person. In the diagram on the right, they had a good day. In the diagram on the left, they had a bad day. They got flustered initially. They had some time pressure that got to them a little bit. They made some careless mistakes. And they made some careless mistakes initially. Notice also in this portion right around here, something here would have also given them quite a few more careless mistakes there. Perhaps they spent too much time on that one hardest question and then realized that and then sort of had to try and crash through the next few questions to catch up. A few things went wrong on this. Same person, but they had a better mindset on their good day, resulted in a better score. Now let's consider this bad day, but you have the ability to change some answers. So those careless mistakes pulled our score down. We had issues with several of these instances. Good day, no real careless mistakes. They got an overall higher mix of questions. Now let's assume that the person on the bad day, they come back and they do change 3 answers. And they do actually change all 3 of those from wrong to right, which again, I think is quite unlikely, but let's assume best case scenario. Even in the instance where you changed all 3 of those wrong answers to correct answers, the overall trajectory of the section will not change. That does not change the actual mix of difficulty questions that you got on the overall section. So you do get a lift, but it will be a very small one. Again, we have to emphasize this idea of being able to go back and change 3 questions. It will be a nice to have, but it will be a very limited application. You still will not want to look at a question and say, oh, well, I'll come back. I could do this now, but I'll come back at the end and do this later. No, 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 no. Because coming back at the end and doing this later, if you could have done it originally, you've sort of depressed the mix of difficulty for the whole section with the poor attempt originally. So this will still be very much I have to do my best with the question that's in front of me, and I'm going to have to make my decisions about where I spend my time. Questions, comments, concerns at the moment? While I'm waiting for questions, comments, or concerns, hopefully we're seeing that so much of this is going to be about my mindset. That good day versus bad day was entirely about how focused was I? How attentive was I? How calm was I during the inference of the test? We're always going to get some wrong. This is not a test where if I study enough, I can get everything right. I'll always be pressed for time. You will not be finishing early on this test. I will have to bail. I will not be able to answer everything. And I will be always looking for the easiest way. That problem that we began with, you could do traditional algebra. Add up 14,000 plus 14,000 plus 16,000 plus 17,000 plus 17,000 plus 17,000. Divide by 6, do that calculation, and you would get a result. There's a much faster, much more efficient way. That will still be true. Moving forward more. For us, how do we decide which version we take? A large part of this will be based on your timeline, but there could be some elements of the different test that make you want to change your timeline a little bit if you are flexible about when you plan to apply. Notice that a lot of this is supposition. Much of the information on this page we are not sure of. We have not been confirmed yet. For example, the specific number of questions that we're going to have in each of the 3 sections when we're looking at reading comprehension versus critical reasoning and the data sufficiency versus each of the 4 integrated reasoning types. Much of that is supposition on our part. Quant is confirmed. The estimated 13 for reading comprehension comes from this thought that there will still be 4 passages. If there are still 4 reading comprehension passages in the verbal section, then you will probably get 13 questions. And again, the breakdown for data insights is based on the supposition that the data insights will be essentially the current integrated reasoning section format with just 8 data sufficiency questions added to it. Notice that problem solving gets a slight increase in the overall percentage. Reading comprehension and critical reasoning get a very slight percentage increase. Data sufficiency gets what would seem to be a substantial decrease. Now, you would think that when you see, oh, data sufficiency is going from 22% of your GMAT weight to only 13% of your GMAT weight, that's a significant change. Let me explain why I don't think data sufficiency is going to decrease in importance at all, and in fact will probably increase in importance. The first thing, on the legacy GMAT, data sufficiency is, roughly speaking, probably 40% of the questions in the quantitative section. It is not the bulk of the quantitative section. It's a significant plurality, but it's not the bulk. But if you look at what will happen in the data insights, if you think of the integrated reasoning question types as their own separate questions, which I think we should, the approach we take to tables is very different from the approach we take to multi-source reasoning, for example. Notice that data sufficiency outweighs by a significant factor any of the individual question types that you will face in data insights. So I think data sufficiency may actually end up becoming more important to us. And the other aspect that's going to be crucial for this, very crucial for this, I want to come back. Remember the timing. On data insights, you're going to have approximately 2 minutes and 15 seconds on average for your questions. That is not enough time for most integrated reasoning questions. I would argue that's probably not enough time for any integrated reasoning questions. So if you want to grab as much integrated reasoning question types as you can in this GMAT Focus section, you're going to need to move very fast on data sufficiency. If I sound excited about this, I actually kind of am. I think that the change to the GMAT Focus is going to be quite fascinating because I think it's going to place even more emphasis on quick decision making. Which problems are worth the time, which problems are not worth the time, and how do I decide that quickly? And I think that's going to be very, very relevant to data insights. And I think that's also going to be a significant impact on verbal. They did not change the average time per question in the verbal section, but they removed the fastest question type. It's going to be very interesting. So as it stands right now, is the GMAT Focus for me? A large part of this, if your date for application is not flexible, then the date determines which version of the test you will take. If your date is flexible and you realize that sentence correction is a weakness of yours, you would take GMAT Focus. If sentence correction is a strength, get that legacy GMAT done this year. Get that done. If you like verbal timing as it stands, if you feel far more comfortable in verbal timing than in quantitative timing, then actually GMAT Focus might be for you because you'll be taking a verbal section where timing is probably even more pressing, but in a section where you feel fine on time. That could give you a significant comparative advantage to other test takers. But on the other hand, if you always feel very rushed and verbal, you do not want to do that. You want to take legacy GMAT. I was about to advance to the next slide, but then I just realized that I haven't had questions, comments, or concerns in a moment. So I want to hold here for a minute. Any questions, any comments, any concerns? And if you have no questions, no comments, no concerns, please type in none, just so I know that everyone is comfortable with the information presented so far. Douglas, how GMAT Focus will measure scores comparatively. If you're speaking to how will it measure scores, quant versus verbal versus, like total scores and percentiles, we do not know yet. I would suspect that the GMAT Focus scoring matrix will treat all three of the subsections equally, and it will basically translate the sum of your three subsection scores and translate that sum into a score band for your total reported score. I suspect that is what will happen. That is what happens on the legacy GMAT. You take your quant subscore, your verbal subscore, you add those two numbers together. The resulting addition of those two subscores puts you in a 20-point band for your total reported score. Yvonne, I do not understand the verbal time issue mentioned. To reiterate on that, you will have a little bit less than 2 minutes per question on verbal. That is the current average time per question on the legacy GMAT verbal section. So the GMAT Focus, you will not have any increase in average time per question. But the fastest question type in verbal is gone. So there is no increase in the average time per question, and yet they've removed the fastest question type. So that will mean that your critical reasoning and reading comprehension speed will become even more crucial in GMAT Focus. Total scores and percentiles, Douglas, we do not know yet. I'm actually kind of wondering if we're ever going to know. GMAC does not release percentiles for the executive assessment, and I'm wondering if that might be a trend moving forward. Just let the calculation be based on score, not percentile, but it will be up to GMAC, obviously not up to me. Do I have comparative analysis of legacy GMAT scores to Focus Edition scores? We do not. We do not have any prep materials yet. Again, here we sit at May 4th, 2023. In June, when we have official prep materials, I believe that quite a few, myself and quite a few of my colleagues are going to be diving into that information and finding out. We score X on legacy GMAT. If we try to mimic the same performance on GMAT Focus, what score would we receive then? We're going to be doing a lot of work there in June, I anticipate, but we don't have any of that information yet. Again, I do not have information on how percentiles will be determined, and I hope that I'll keep an eye on the chat for any further questions. But in the meantime, I want to just demonstrate the one last decision factor that could come into play with legacy GMAT versus GMAT Focus, and that is what I describe as sort of a nexus, a correlation of mindset between data sufficiency and integrated reasoning. Everyone take a few moments, consider this problem. I'll give you a few moments to get started, and then I'll start walking through a solution here. X and Y non-zero. What is the value of Y over X? Surprisingly direct question for data sufficiency. Statement 1 on its own, X equals 6. Well, fantastic, but that tells me nothing about Y, so statement 1 on its own cannot be sufficient. Each statement on their own cannot be sufficient. Statement 2, Y squared equals X squared. Now, you might suspect that that means that Y and X might have to have the same value, and so Y over X would be 1. But is Y positive or is Y negative? Is X positive or is X negative? And so we would not know, and so statement 2 would not be sufficient on its own. And even combined, I know that x equals 6. I know that y squared would therefore equal 36, but y itself, is y itself positive or is y itself negative? I do not know. This data sufficiency mindset of seeking out the assumption that would lead to careless mistakes. The careless assumption here being they are non-zero, we do not know positive or negative. And even when I combine the statements, I still have this sort of counter assumption of I still do not know positive versus negative. Now, I hope that in the next problem, we'll see sort of a carry through of that type of mindset, seeking out counter assumptions. Everyone take a moment here. Fairly classic integrated reasoning presentation of table information. If you are familiar with common integrated reasoning presentations, you may be wondering where are the other 3 yes/no statements that you would be judging. We've just simplified this problem for the ease of assessment here today. We look percent of exports of coffee, and we see coffee. Brazil has 40% of their export of coffee, and they rank 1. And they have 32% of the world share of exports, and they rank number 1. And so you might suspect that you would say, we can judge this based on the information we have provided. And we look at this and we say, but wait, I don't know this. Brazil exports 40%, Brazil has 40% of their production, and they export 30% of the world share. But I don't have any information on other countries. It is entirely possible that there may be other countries that have a smaller production than Brazil, but export everything. This thought of how do I examine for possible counterexamples? How do I consider certain missing information that I don't have? That is something which can come into play in both data sufficiency and integrated reasoning in a way that does not come into play in problem solving. And so that could be one last factor in our decision. The impact of data sufficiency in the data insights section. If I'm very fast on data sufficiency, GMAT Focus will probably be for me. Very fast data sufficiency work will allow me more time relative to other test takers when I'm looking at integrated reasoning, and that will be a very, very valuable advantage on GMAT Focus. If, however, I am slower on data sufficiency, that is not for me. I would not want to mix data sufficiency with integrated reasoning. And then finally, the last just core aspect of this, integrated reasoning is now folded into the overall score. So if I overperform on integrated reasoning compared to my GMAT score, the reported total score for GMAT legacy, if, for example, I regularly score 7s or 8s on integrated reasoning, but my reported GMAT score is, let's say, a 650 or a 600, I would want to take GMAT Focus because that ability in integrated reasoning is very valuable to come into my overall play. However, if I underperform in integrated reasoning, if I'm hitting, say, 700s on the legacy GMAT, but my integrated reasoning score is typically only a 4 or a 5, I want to take the legacy GMAT. I do not want that integrated reasoning score folded into my overall score. And so this, my friends, is the final, with what we know at this point in May 2023, this is the metric I would be using to decide whether I will take GMAT Focus or take Legacy GMAT. I'm going to hold here for questions. And if you are finding this helpful, again, hit that like button. If you have no questions, just type none. While I'm waiting for questions, we have a few moments to discuss how to prep. Thank you, Abhinav. I'm going to go ahead and go through all the animations. 4 points on this slide. And this is, one of my colleagues pointed out that this is probably the most boring slide visually in the entire deck, but it is probably the most important slide in the entire deck. So many people study in a counterproductive way. And the first is actually point 3. Reading does not equal studying. Testing does. Challenging yourself. There was actually a very interesting article, I think in the New York Times a month or two ago, publishing the results of a study that had been conducted on students where students were grouped into, the experiment participants were put into 3 groups. Group 1 was able to study material 4 times, and they had the material in front of them each time they studied it. So they could read it, and the next time they studied, they could reread it again. Next time they studied, they could reread it again. I forget what group 2 was. Group 3 was a group that, again, had 4 study opportunities, but the first opportunity was the only time they were given the material. They had 1 time to read the material, and every other time after that, they had to try to write down as much of the material as they could recall and just continuously test themselves. What do I remember from what I read? And that was the only thing they were able to do, continuously try to recall. They were never given the material again. And in a month's time, the groups were tested, and the group that had only seen material once and had tested themselves repeatedly, what can I recall when the material is not in front of me, did far better on the final test. Reading is not studying. Challenging yourself is studying. Always start by attempting some sample problems. Try first. Then, as you struggle, you go back, you read some material, you read some text about how to work a particular type of problem. The moment, and this is whether this is in a book or an explanation, the moment you realize that you have read something that might unlock a path forward in a problem you struggled in, stop reading. Go back and reattempt that problem right at that moment. And then space this out. Make sure that you craft a record of problems to reattempt or topics to revisit, and do it on a regular schedule. I commonly tell my students 3 days and 10 days. There's nothing particularly magic about those numbers, but it needs to be some element of spaced repetition. And then item 4, we do not study well when we are tired, physically or mentally. I vividly recall working with a tutoring student once, and we sat down to start a session. He said, Chris, I'm so excited. I'm so pumped about this session. I just finished doing a giant set of 75 problems. I am ready to do this. And he spent like 3 to 4 hours doing that, all in one stretch, 75 problems in a row. And I had to stop and ask, can you tell me what you remember from any of those 75 problems? And the look on the person's face, this slow dawn of realization, they didn't remember anything that they had done. They had carried their studies entirely too far, and they'd gone past the point of usable studies. Get your rest, test yourself, don't read, and space out your studies. And then finally, the analysis of a problem. Every problem you attempt should build a plan for future problems or mimic a plan that you've already made. The most core study mental aspect to this is, what did I see and what did that make me think or do? Build some plans on when I see blank in a problem, I want to do this. I'm just going to hold here for a moment. What did I mean intend? Oh, different. The spaced repetition. For example, if you try a problem and you struggled on it, and then you realized later how to do it, and you come back and redo it, make a plan to do that problem again in 3 days and in 10 days. If you attempt a problem and you got it wrong, you made some mistake, look at that problem again. What mistake did I make? What mistake did I make, and how will I prevent that in the future? And then in 3 days and again in 10 days, redo that problem, putting your plan into practice, doing the thing you said will prevent that mistake from happening. You want to build habits out of your studies. Other questions, other comments, other concerns? We have a few more moments here. I will put up this slide, which, yes, Anki is a delightful tool. It's not one that I personally use, but many of my colleagues love it. It is a fantastic tool to help schedule out your studies and build some spaced repetition into that. So we take a step back and you pick 5. In fact, any question set that you do that is longer than 5 or at maximum 10 questions, you're doing too much because you cannot review more than 10 questions rigorously inside of one study session. And this actually in practice tests, when you go through 60 questions, be aware that that type of practice test review should take you 2 to 3 days. Coupon code here to receive a small discount on our courses. I will also urge anyone, um, every single one of the first courses is available to anyone. Sign up as a trial student, sit in on the first course. If you have the time, sit in on multiple first courses if you can, and then see an instructor that you think sort of resonates with you, and then seek out that instructor to work with. That you can shop around that. We do this intentionally. We encourage this. Um, Please sit in on a class. We would love to see you. And one final call for questions before we call it a day. And I do need to go here in just a moment. All right. Well, I want to thank all of you very much. It has been an absolute delight working with you today. I hope you found this helpful. If you did, again, hit that like button. But other than that, I wish all of you the best of luck, whichever path you take, whether it's Legacy GMAT or GMAT Focus. Samir, you would, how can we find teachers? You would probably you would sit in on a trial class, and if that teacher resonates with you, very well. If not, it's actually perfectly acceptable to reach out to student services in Manhattan Prep and say, I'm looking for an instructor that has these particular qualities. And we know ourselves and we know each other fairly well, and my colleagues and I, and we would gladly recommend you to teachers that have the particular qualities that you feel would most benefit you. Reach out to student services. We are happy to take that type of information from you and help match you with an instructor that would be best for you. Thank you all. Have a wonderful morning, afternoon, or evening. And again, best of luck to you.